We alluded to this on both recap shows that we did this weekend. We're going to spend some time on Monday doing sort of postmortems of sort, but also just looking forward at what needs to change, what the priority should be like for all of the teams that lost this weekend. Beller sent me some initial notes about the layout and some details about each team, and I was like, what order is this in? It's the order they were eliminated in. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to go through all 5 teams that were eliminated from playoff contention this weekend and just chat about what their future might look like.
I'm pretty excited for this. I think when I went into this, I think when you come out of the games, you assume whatever you're going to think about this team is going to be a little bit more complicated than it is. But then I kind of dug into a lot of these. And for the most part, other than maybe the last team we're going to talk about, I felt like what I kind of thought actually coming out of the game is about where I landed after doing a little bit more research, digging, trying to look forward.
So as you were starting this process with the Panthers, what was like the first thought that came to your mind?
Really cool story. This team is still not good. It's not a good roster. They paid to be better on defense, and they were, but this was still the 22nd best defense in the league, and they were by DVOA, and they were 25th on offensive DVOA. And I think that is a little bit skewed by like the offensive line being really banged up towards the second half of the year, so they couldn't run the ball, I think, quite the way that they had for the first half of the season, where they actually were kind of giving it to teams. But still, I think we all knew how lucky it felt in the moment that they could escape with 8 and 9, not even winning their final game, still getting in. But I think when you're in the moment, you still try to play it up like how nice of a team this actually was. But then you look at it again, they were by DVOA marginally better than the New York Giants. We think about those two teams extremely differently, but it's probably more reality that they are closer than we would think.
Close is a good term, because I think when I'm thinking about the Panthers from this season, it's really important to acknowledge the strides that they made, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, that's where they really went from historically bad to an acceptable level by the time we got to the end of the year. The number that I think puts the finest point on that. Last year, the Panthers were the only team in next-gen history with a run defense success rate of 50% or more. Since 2016, they were the only team that allowed a 50% rushing success rate or more. They allowed 3,000 rushing yards in 2024. They tied for the worst mark in the next gen era at EPA per rush. It was like 0.12, which is a very good passing game. Like very good, like top 5 passing game. This year, they go from a 50% rushing success rate allowed to 38.8, which was the 7th best mark in the league. They finished 23rd overall in defensive DVOA. They were still bottom 10 in EPA per dropback. We'll get to where some of the holes are with the team personnel-wise, but they made significant strides on that side of the ball. I do think that the offense, when the full arsenal of players was there, you can talk yourself into what that can be moving forward. If you're trying to spin it optimistically, because I had the exact same numbers. They were still 26th in EPA per dropback per next-gen stats. They were 26th in passing DVOA. With Jalen Coker on the field, they were a league average passing game by EPA per dropback. And so that was in the back half of the season when the offensive line was banged up and the running game wasn't very good. So if you can have Coker, McMillan, Jatavian Sanders comes back, you find some sort of like speed number 3 receiver if you like feel like Legette's getting pushed out of the rotation, or that's just what he becomes for you, right? He's just a role player, which is fine. You have the offensive line coming back with a couple question marks, which we can talk about. And you feel like some of the flashes that you got from Bryce Young in high leverage moments and some of the big time throws he was able to make, that's something that you can carry over. Is there a path for this being the 14th best offense in the league next year? I think if you're trying to spin it optimistically, like there is a world where that can all come together for you.
I think they can do that. That to me still feels like a really high-end outcome. And also, I think if they don't fix the offensive line, and fix meaning like a couple of guys are pending free agents, Ickey Ekwonu is potentially not going to be healthy for next year. So they've got some things to answer on that side. To me, the identity of the team and the settling part of the team is still when they can run the ball. Like it felt like their best games were when they could control the game. Like the Rams games, especially the first one, felt like kind of lucky in the sense that, again, you're betting on like these 4th down plays where you're just chucking it up to the big guys. And that can work sometimes, but I think that just leaves you in a really volatile space with their passing game. So I think if they mostly go into next year with a lot of the same guys, and maybe the offensive line is 5 to 10% worse even at their best because of, again, some of the injuries, a couple of guys leaving, that to me it still feels like even if you have a couple of those games that are really high, like the Falcons game or a couple of those Rams games, it just feels like there's still to me going to be a lot of the lows where you just straight up lose games because of the way that your offense plays at times.
That's what happened all the time this year. I mean, it was the most inconsistent offense in the league by pretty much every single measure. The offensive line composition is worth considering. Like you said, Ickey Ekwonu, we're going to say this multiple times on this show, has a torn patellar tendon. It's a devastating injury for anybody, but it's happening consistently with so many offensive linemen. If you look at some of the numbers behind it, only like 55% of guys who sustain that injury even come back from that injury.
At all?
And yes.
Wow.
And if you look at like the actual like historic medical data associated with the injury, it's a devastating injury. And in terms of return to like performance level, which is a nebulous kind of way of framing it, but I think they did it by like PFF grade. This is like an actual like study that was done. It's like 35% of guys return to previous levels of performance within 2 years. So it's a career-altering injury for a lot of players. There are some recent success stories. Josh Simmons is somebody who tore his patellar tendon a year ago. He came back, looked healthy, was playing well for the Chiefs. And so there are guys who can come back from it pretty quickly, but it is an injury that can truly change the course of your career when you're a player who weighs 330 pounds the way that Ickey Ekwonu does.
That's the other thing is like these big guys, especially once they're have some of the lower body injuries. Exactly. That can be really scary. I guess if you're trying to like paint the silver lining on the other end, like Robert Hunt should be healthier next year. So you have at least a little bit of a push and pull there. But again, like Taylor Moton is getting a little bit older, and like you've just got other guys on the interior that are potentially up for free agency. Like it's just going to be a different offensive line next year than it was this year.
Center is the question, because 100%. Cade Mays and Austin Corbett are both hitting free agency by the end of the season. Cade Mays he kind of won that job, and I'm actually curious what his market's going to look like in free agency this year. I think you can make an argument for trying to bring him back.
They probably should. I mean, he'll be the best young center on the market. There are a couple other guys
Linderbaum.
I guess Linderbaum.
Yeah,
Linderbaum is also like
specific.
Well, and that also to me, I would be shocked if the Ravens just don't find a way to make that work.
I mean, if he's hitting free agency, he's going to have suitors. We'll get to a team a little bit later that I feel like could very much be in the market for a Tyler Linderbaum. So, and then left tackle and center, the questions there. Again, I think we'll see what happens with the receiving core. But if Leggett just becomes your number 3 kind of vertical player, I think you can live that way. The tight end room has some pieces to it. Like Mitchell Evans
They have 3 like quality players there.
There's a decent collection of supporting cast pieces here. The Bryce Young of all of this, I'm at a spot where he has played well enough that you just keep trying to chip away at getting the most you can with what he's giving you and trying to build the best roster you can around him. Early reports, Adam Schefter, I think, said earlier this week that they are going to pick up his 5th-year option. It's going to be $27 million in 2027. That's a lot of money, but at the same time, the downside case, if he has a really nice season, a really nice lame duck season, and then you're sitting there at the end of 2026, you're like, what are we going to do? The franchise tag is likely going to be like $48 million in 2027. And so you're protecting yourself here and kind of giving yourself a 2-year runway at the position. I still have my questions about what a Bryce Young offense and what the ceiling of a Bryce Young offense looks like. But I feel like he's played well enough where he definitively falls into like you can win with him bucket if a lot of the other stuff going on around him is right. And I feel like that's kind of how the Panthers have to operate, because I'm not sure they have a different solution at this point.
I think I kind of agree with that and kind of don't. I think you can win with him insofar as being like your ceiling is like a 10-win team.
Yes.
I think his ceiling
that's where I fall as well.
Right. It's just significantly lower than like, because in my mind, like the ideal like win with quarterback is like a Baker Mayfield, but like his ceiling is significantly higher, can like push you to like top 5-7 offense.
Yeah. I don't think you're going to be a top 5 or 7. I said it before. I think you're shooting for being like the 14th best offense. And I think you can win with that sort of construction, but it's a very narrow path.
Yeah.
But I'm just not sure if you're the Panthers right now, where else you would seek out an option. And I think he played well enough that you just have to see what you can do with him next year.
And that's the thing. If this was the 2024 draft class where there's like 5 or 6 guys that people are trying to sell themselves on, and it's like, we can shuffle around a little bit in the first round and maybe we can go get a guy. This just doesn't seem like the class that you would even do that, even if you wanted one.
You have the 19th pick.
Yeah, you have the 19th pick, and there's like 1.5 quarterback prospects that anybody likes. Like, it's very unlikely that you would really get yourself in position to get one of those guys. And so I understand them picking up the 5th-year option in terms of you probably weren't going to replace him this offseason. And then next offseason, like, $27 million or whatever sounds like a lot of money, but it's half of whatever the going rate is for a quarterback. So it's kind of whatever. It's really not as financially binding as it sounds. I think I'm still at a point where I would be, even though I get why they picked up the option to save themselves for this year and next year, I just would be shocked if they ever get to a point where they feel like they are going to extend him.
I think that's probably right. Or extend him at like the market
rate.
Right,
at like a market rate, right?
And we don't see, I mean, any quarterback who is getting a contract with the team that drafted them after the end of that rookie contract is getting $50 million a year.
They're not getting the Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield $30 million. Yes, they're getting the $50 million up in that range.
I'm really curious if a team does eventually sit there and say, we're giving you the mid-tier quarterback contract. Like that's what you deserve. That's the type of player you are. It has not happened yet, and this is 2 years down the road, we're going to have this conversation, but Bryce Young is the type of guy where maybe you could talk yourself into that. At the same time, though, if you're doing that with a quarterback in that situation, most of the time, the reason those quarterback contracts are handed out is because teams have to give out those quarterback contracts because they don't have a pathway to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just think you see what happens. You see what you get out of Bryce Young in 2026, and then in the 2027 offseason, you evaluate your options. I think that's where the Panthers are right now.
Yeah.
Just the state of the roster overall, and the reason that this team does not have a lot of like financial wiggle room. And they have like $29 million in cap space per over the cap heading into 2026. They're going to carry over some cap space. They don't have a lot of like clear ways to save a ton of money against the cap either. There are $4 or $5 million cuts here and there, but there aren't a lot of like, oh, we'll save $20 million if we move on from this guy. And part of that is just because they've had to spend in free agency to overcome what their drafts have looked like over the last 3 years. The 2024 draft is already looking tough. Drafted Xavier Leggett in the first round, Jonathan Brooks in the second round, Trevin Wallace in the third round. None of those guys have really been contributors to what you've been as a team over the last couple of years. The 2023 draft is just Bryce Young. The 2022 draft is just Ickey Ekwonu. That's it. So there just is not an underlying foundation of talent here, and that's why they had to go out and spend. And if you look at all the guys that are making like real money on this team, Trevin Merrick, Robert Hunt, Damian Lewis, Tashawn Wharton, those guys will cost like $80 million against the cap this year combined. And then you've already given out extensions to Taylor Moton, to Derek Brown, to J.C. Horn, the guys that are worth handing out money to. But this is not a cheap roster. Like they have spent a lot of the resources. So there aren't a lot of clear pathways to adding a bunch of talent at a bunch of different positions. If I had to kind of settle on what their needs are and where I would seek out modest additions sometime this offseason to round out, especially the defense, off-ball linebacker, I think, is where you have to start. Christian Roseman is a free agent after this year. Even if he wasn't, that's a position that I think you still have to upgrade. Trevin Wallace, I think, is still a question mark heading into his third year after being hurt for a good chunk of this season. I think you need another pass rusher. Scorton is, I think, on his way to being like a solid number 2.
Yes.
Princely, I think, is a good situational number 3 pass rusher, third-round pick. I think that's probably what he is. You need to try to go out and find like a true difference maker on the edge at some point.
Because even for as, I think, optimistic as we might be about those two guys, and I really do like Nick Swarton, and obviously they have Derek Brown, this was still the worst pass rush in the league. Like them and the Niners, who lost Nick Bosa and like 3 other guys, those two were equal pass rushers for most of this season.
Yes, and a lot of their additions and body types are run stuffers, right? They went out and got Bobby Brown. They have Derek Brown. They have A'Shawn Robinson. Like whatever they wanted to be in that area, they accomplished that. But they still need more pass rush juice. And then I think the last position, I would say, they need a little bit more range and athleticism on the back end, right? Nick Scott is playing a ton of snaps for this team. The way they use Trevin Merrick close to the line of scrimmage, I think just a safety that's going to cover some ground for you on the back end, that is worth seeking out if you're Carolina.
And you don't want Trevin Merrick to like be your Band-Aid solution to that. Be like, oh, we'll just play Trevin Merrick a little bit deeper and we'll play somebody else in the box. The closer he is to the box, to the action, he's been better. That was true even at points when he was in Las Vegas. There were stretches where they played him too far at deep safety and he was just kind of, quiet. And then like the closer he can get to the line of scrimmage and make a little bit of noise. He was really, really good this year doing that.
They drafted Lathan Ransom in the 4th round this year. I think you go with a veteran for most of the year with Scott. Is he somebody that can take over that job next season? That gives you an answer. Then the other just personnel thing that's worth pointing out, the Mike Jackson contract looks awesome. Him making like $8 million against the cap, considering how good he was for them this year. That contract looks really, really good in retrospect.
Of all the signings they made, like Trevin Merrick, you you paid him what you should for that safety, and he, I think, made good on that. Mike Jackson is significantly like an incredible contract compared to all the guys that they handed out up front. Like the Mike Jackson contract looks awesome. He was about as good as a number 2 corner can be this year. He was awesome.
It's always dangerous to think about things in this way, but with Carolina specifically, I think you just try to have incremental gains on both sides of the ball. Can you go from being the 22nd best offense and defense in the league to a top 15 offense and defense next year and just be competitive? Just be competitive in the NFC South. Like, I truly think that is a reasonable pathway and a reasonable outcome for next year's Panthers. I think that's on the table. I think you have to feel pretty good about what you've gotten from Canales and from the staff over the first couple years and the path that you're on. I think you just keep trying to tread the path that you're on.
And that's the thing. I think with the offense, even if I got questioned about the quarterback, I can sell myself that just like another year of like, yeah, Tetero McMillan gets even a little bit better. They figure out how more they want to use all these 3 tight ends. Those guys stay a little bit healthier. And Canales just honing what he wants to do with the offense. I can get myself there on that. The defense, it's going to need to be like 2 pretty significant upgrades up front for me to start to feel good about it.
Let's get to our next one here. The Green Bay Packers. Obviously, the biggest question that has to be answered about the Packers, we've gotten some clarity on in the last 24 hours or so. Multiple reports that they're going to start working on an extension for Matt LaFleur. I mean, that's the biggest question about the Matt LaFleur part of this. It's different than some of the other coaching considerations. It's not just whether you want to move on from Matt LaFleur. It's his contract is up after the 2026 season. And so he needs a new contract extension. And I assume he's going to want a lot of money to be the head coach of the Green Bay Packers. I'm not surprised that they're starting that process because I think he should be the head coach of the Green Bay Packers. We've talked about this.
I also think he should. I just think optically it is going to look really funny when they give him like a pretty hefty extension after the worst loss of his Packers tenure, probably. Like that is going to look pretty funny.
I spent a lot of time thinking about this on like Sunday morning and just the idea of whether they should move on from him, what that would look like. And where I land with this is I just don't know who these like magical coaches are who people think are going to come in and give you better results than somebody like Matt LaFleur has given you.
He's missed the playoffs once. They've won like 10 plus games in a majority of those seasons.
This is an incredibly frustrating loss. And I'm not trying to diminish that or dismiss that if you're a Packers fan and you're sitting here wanting some heads to roll. I can understand that. But if you just take a step back and you think about what this has been in the last few years when they've pivoted to this version of the roster with Jordan Love and all of the young pieces that they have. In 23, I think their over-under in 23 was like 8.5. They make the playoffs. They destroy the Cowboys in the wild card round. And then they give the Niners all they can stand on the road in the divisional round. It is a roaring success of a season. The problem is they haven't really built on that, and that we can discuss that. But that is a great first step with this version of the Packers, which I think is demonstrably different than the Aaron Rodgers version of the Packers was. In 24, you, again, surpass your preseason over-under. You go on the road and lose to the eventual Super Bowl champions as 5-point underdogs as one of the youngest teams in the league. I think that's totally reasonable. This year, their over-under was 10.5. They finished 9-7-1. They didn't try in Week 18 against the Vikings. If they beat the Vikings in Week 18, they would have had 10.5 wins when you consider the tie. And they flame out in the playoffs, and that's worth considering. But at the same time, I look at this, and I think that there probably should be some reflection and some change based on how this season ended. You do some stuff with the staff. You think about some of your situational processes.
If there's any serious concern and contention about how Matt LaFleur operates, to me is like he does sometimes play to not lose the game. Obviously it's easy to say that coming off of the Bears game they just had, where they're like trying to play pretty conservatively, I thought, in the second half. To me, it was the Dallas game. The drive that they have at the end of that, where they are playing for the tying field goal instead of trying to win the game, that to me is insanity. When you have a roster and a quarterback as good as they, like, you should be a little bit more aggressive, and it does infuriate me at times that there are moments where it just feels like he doesn't want to put foot to the pedal.
And even some of the timeout usage in this last game.
Yeah.
I just think those are the elements of being a head coach that are important. But none of these head coaching candidates or prospects or the guys that you would hire are perfect. None of them have all of these things that all line up at the same time. I just don't think you're going to go out and find somebody that's giving you, when you think about the different ways that you can affect the game as a head coach, And I think Matt LaFleur affects the game as a play calling offensive head coach in a meaningful way. They are consistently getting an advantage on that side of the ball, and that's incredibly valuable. Whatever drawbacks he has with some of the situational stuff, I don't think offsets what you're getting in that way. So this idea that you're going to go out and get like a true head coach that's really going to be a difference maker in that way, what are the chances that if you add it all up in the aggregate, you're going to get the offensive advantage with that sort of coach? Like those guys, your Vrabels, your Harbaughs, your Dan Campbells, like those guys are great in some of the situational stuff in that CEO type role, but I think you see the downsides of that. Like you saw it with Dan Campbell this year having to change out coordinators. You've seen it with Vrabel in the past when he hasn't had the right coordinator. You see it with Jim Harbaugh right now as he's about to fire his offensive coordinator. Even somebody like John Harbaugh, the idea that like, well, what if we replaced Matt LaFleur with John Harbaugh? So you're going to replace your head coach because he's crashing out at the end of some of these games, and you're going to go hire John Harbaugh, who has had the exact same problem over the last couple of years?
With better rosters and a better quarterback. And I still like John Harbaugh, but you know what I'm saying.
I just think that there are not these magical solutions. Like there isn't this perfect coaching candidate out there that is without question. And even if you're playing the percentages, going to give you a better chance to win with this roster than Matt LaFleur has consistently given you.
You can also learn how to do that stuff.
Exactly.
And there's a chance that he never does. Maybe this is just a blind spot for him forever. But both Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan are significantly better in those areas than they were 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And we saw Sean McVay win a Super Bowl when he wasn't any good at that stuff.
I want to say this. The LaFleur, when it comes to the feel of the game type of decisions and like the aggressiveness and all of that, that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
That like going for it on fourth down, if you look at it, if you look like Ben Baldwin's numbers, no team went for it on fourth down at a higher percentage in the situations where they should this year than the Green Bay Packers. So there is like situational decision making where he is doing some of the right things. So I just think that you should not overreact to how the season ends in this way and cut bait with this staff and think that you're going to do better elsewhere, because I just don't think you're going to. I think this is probably the best coach that you're going to get. And if you want to have some upgrades, and Justice Gate has talked a lot about this, where they don't really pay their coaches very much. And so the pool of money to pay assistants isn't very high when they are promoting people. Like when Adam Stenovich is the offensive coordinator who's just promoted into that job from the offensive line coach, they just promoted someone else from within the staff to that offensive line coach job. And again, if you want to reevaluate how you're handling some of that stuff, I think those are the types of smaller changes that are maybe worth making rather than completely hitting the reset button with somebody who has been as successful as Matt LaFleur.
Right, because then even if you're looking at that from the Packers organization perspective, some of the assistant coaching stuff and whatever, that's not Matt LaFleur's fault. Like you could say that maybe he should hire better people, but if the pool of money to do so is a little bit more pinched, it's harder for him to do that.
Some of the personnel questions for next year, I think, is kind of where my mind goes next. The defense after the Micah injury, they were 29th in EPA per dropback. They were 30th in defensive success rate. Like that defense without Micah Parsons was not good enough. And so I wonder what changes there, especially if Jeff Hafley gets hired away to be a head coach. Like you're going to have to potentially handle that. And then some of the personnel stuff. Rashawn Gary has a $28 million cap hit next year. I just don't think he's going to play on a $28 million cap hit. He's not giving you that sort of impact. I think you probably need another interior defensive lineman, even though Devontae Wyatt's coming back. Quay Walker is hitting free agency. And sadly, it does seem like they probably need an outside corner at some point. And the fact that they gave Nate Hobbs that contract and now he's sitting there as not one of your top three corners with Bullard in the nickel, but he's making $12 million next year. We talked about this right after the game. Like, I think that the ways they spent their money and some of their resources this offseason, and the fact that all of them look like, if not huge misses, then guys who are not actively contributing to making the team better, that's a tough place to be if you're the Packers.
If you spend that much money and those are still your problem points, even if it's not necessarily like glaring red lights, that is a massive problem. So yeah, like them, I think the secondary, even though like the Nate Hobbs thing hurts and they're probably going to need to fix the outside corner a little bit, to me it really does come down to the defensive line. Because obviously the way that they bled talent there over the course of the year was kind of insane. Obviously, you trade Kenny Clark, which getting Micah Parsons back for that, you would much rather have Micah Parsons, but you do lose a body on defensive tackle. You lose Devonta Wyatt at some point this season, and then almost every guy behind Devonta Wyatt at some point was in and out of the lineup at this season. I mean, there were stretches where they were down to like D lineman 6 at certain points in the season. That wasn't necessarily the case in this last game, but they, I think, really need to fix their depth there, because if they if they can't defend the run, and part of what Hafley wants to do is be in some of this too high stuff and throw some of these funky pressures. Well, if you're in 2nd and 4 all the time, who gives a shit? You don't get to do any of that stuff.
Be curious what happens with Quay Walker. He's a free agent. He was playing well by the end of the season. The linebackers were one of the strengths of that defense when you were watching them by the end of the season. So if he's gone, then that's somebody that you potentially need to replace, which that's worth considering. Anything else about the Packers? Anything else about just what's on your mind as it relates to the end of this Green Bay Packers season and what might need to be a little bit different next year?
I'm actually fine if they move forward with like what the skill players are, because again, they still don't have a superstar, but like they've got enough guys. Christian Watson played incredibly well. Like
totally
Tucker Kraft will be
that.
back. The offensive line needs help again, and it is going to be hard to find where they get that. Obviously, don't have a first round pick. I think your first pick is at 52 or something like that. You don't necessarily have a ton of money to throw around, and they're also in a weird spot where it's like they've spent so many resources there recently that I wonder if they just feel stuck, like they have to move forward. Like, you just drafted Jordan Morgan a couple of years ago. He's been struggling for you. You just paid Aaron Banks, who has been not like a disaster, but you probably would have wanted more for what you paid him. And then Anthony Belton, I think, is a little bit all over the place, and they're not sure what they're going to get from him.
He was a rookie. I mean, he was playing a bunch of different positions.
You can give him another time. Yeah.
I think with that group specifically, if you're looking at where they've invested and who's potentially moving on, Rasheed Walker, their left tackle over the last couple of years, is a free agent. It seems to me like we might walk into training camp next year with Jordan Morgan at left tackle, Aaron Banks at left guard, a question mark at center, because I'm not sure they can bring Jenkins back at $24 million. And Sean Ryan, who played center for them after Jenkins got hurt, he's also a free agent. Anthony Belton at right guard, Zach Tom at right tackle. We just talked about
that. Does not sound good.
But at this point,
yeah, exactly. That's the problem.
That might have to be the group that you're working with. And we just talked about the patellar tendon thing with Ekwonu. Zach Tom has a partially torn patellar tendon. And so who knows how quickly he's going to be back. So that's definitely the group on offense where there's concern. The pass catchers, Doubs is a free agent. I think you're likely going to lose him because unless you want to tag him, which is going to be a ton of money, he's going to get paid in free agency. It's funny that the position that was one of the wastelands in free agency over the last couple of years was receiver. And then this year, between him and Pierce, those are two of the most intriguing free agents of the entire class with the way that Doubs was playing by the end of the season. But I think if you're rolling next year into the season with Watson and the way that he played this year, Golden, Jayden Reed, and Tucker Kraft, you're fine. I think that's more than enough at receiver, because I do think even if Golden didn't really produce a ton this year, I think you saw enough from him where like when you think about like complementary skill sets with the other two guys, I do think that's actually like a really solid trio to build around, especially when you're going to put Kraft back into the mix.
He's talented, man. Like I would wager some of the issues they had with him was just like a coach like Matt LaFleur. I think sometimes with rookies can get a little bit, can just get a little bit hairy. And I figure it was a lot of that. And so hopefully with just a little bit more development going into next year, he is a guy who, again, maybe he's not the superstar you want when the Packers finally spend a first round pick at wide receiver, but I do think that he'll be a nice piece.
He was the 22nd pick in the draft.
Yeah. It's not like they spent like the 9th pick on, Jalen Waddle or whoever it was.
All right. I'm going to let you start us off here. I want to know where your off-season anxieties potentially lie, or where your thoughts are right now as we sit in the end of the 2025 Jags season.
I think the word I come to is content. Like, I would have liked to see them go further because I do think that this was a good team and they were playing really, really well. But like, I'm fine with how especially the second half of this year gone. And there's going to be a couple of questions to answer, but I said this to you after Wild Card Weekend, I think before we went live on the show. The Jaguars were the only team where I feel the only team who lost, so that we'll talk about today, where I feel pretty good about where they're going in 2026 and also did not embarrass themselves this weekend. Because like the Packers, I still feel fine about where they're going to be in 2026. They were embarrassing. Yeah. The Eagles will probably be fine in 2026. They were embarrassing. The Panthers were actually not embarrassing. I have a lot of questions about what they're going to be in 2026. Even the Chargers, like they'll probably be fine. They were embarrassing. The Jaguars were truly the only team where it was like, you played a good game, you had a good season. Josh Allen was on fire for 4 quarters. And sometimes you just lose a game that way.
I don't necessarily disagree. I'm curious where your optimism lies in them being okay in 2026. So if you're trying to build me the case for why this team is going to be competitive again next year, where do you think that starts?
The offensive line, or the offensive line is actually the one question I have. The offense in general, assuming they still stay relatively healthy, like I think the continuity there with Cohen, Trevor Lawrence getting another year in the system, like they're keeping Jacoby Myers. Parker Washington will be back for next season. He still has another year on his contract. You've got Brian Thomas Jr., who hopefully can get a little bit more comfortable in the offense and like get back to what he was as a rookie going into next year. Like, even if I've got some questions about what the offensive line was, I still think the continuity, the firepower on offense, I'm there. The defense, I have some more questions about, and I think some of the numbers over the back half of last season or of this season were they were playing a lot of bad quarterbacks. And I still like a lot of what they did schematically, and I think they tackle really well. The front, I think, is still really good. Secondary, especially at corners, got some questions, but part of my hopium there is like Travis Hunter will be playing corner next year. When the receiver
I certainly hope so.
Because here's the thing. He's where you would play him in the offense would basically be Parker Washington snaps. I think at this stage, this sounds crazy. You cannot take Parker Washington off the field for Travis Hunter. Like he's a dynamic player, but Parker Washington was really awesome for them. It would be crazy to take him off the field for him.
I think part of this is just,
and your biggest hole is corner.
That's the reason, is that obviously we know that receivers, when you're looking at just the market in general, receivers make a lot more than corners at this point. Receivers are more valuable positions in the way that we reward them in the NFL right now than corners are. But if you look at the makeup of this roster, and even if, let's say you traded Brian Thomas Jr., they're very different players. They would play very different roles within the offense. And so even if you wanted to do that, I'm not sure that's enough of a justification. That's not enough of a justification to move Travis Hunter back to receiver. So Buster Brown and Greg Newsome are both hitting free agency this offseason. And so you have a need at corner, and you just drafted a guy who is an incredibly talented corner. So just sliding him in there, one of those outside corner spots, and rolling with what you have at receiver, I think makes total sense. Even if, though, you are going to move Travis Hunter to corner, if I were another team, I'd call about Brian Thomas Jr.
I would too. Like I don't know what the deal was this year. I think once they found a little bit of a role for him, I think that they'll be happy that he can be like their field stretching X. But I would at least see what the deal was there and try to see if I could.
If I was Buffalo, I'd call the day after the season ends.
But okay, not that it really matters because they're not in the same division, but can you imagine Buffalo beating your ass and then in the offseason they're like, can we take your
you can't let that
you can't
let that affect your decision making. You got to do what's best for the team. I'll be curious what that looks like. I'm pretty sure I land on, unless I'm blown away, it's worth having him on the team. Like that skill set and what he provides for you there, you need that within the offense, and that's the best version of it you're going to get. But I would at least call if I were another team because of just how strange this season went. I think the case for optimism is pretty much what you laid out. After the bye, they were 12th in offensive success rate and 6th in EPA per play. When you had that team with Jacoby Myers, with Parker Washington, with Trevor Lawrence getting settled, that offense looked really good. On defense, they were 6th in defensive success rate and 3rd in EPA per play. Some of that is driven by the competition that they played in the corners. You're not going to create 31 turnovers or 30. You're not going to have 31 takeaways next year, most likely. So that's, I think, part of the pessimistic case if you wanted to spin it that way. But I think there's a lot to work with here, and I'm in the same boat you are. I think the DB room and linebacker too, because Devin Lloyd is hitting free agency. I think that's personnel-wise the biggest consideration that this team has to address, especially on defense as we head into next year.
It will be like Devin Lloyd played really well this year, and he'll get paid by somebody. I think when you're a linebacker who's really only had like 12 good games for it, like I'm not that worried about them losing him. I think I have some amount of faith that they'll be able to replace him. Ventrell Miller has actually given them a decent like backup snaps. I don't know if he'll be the starter, but it doesn't worry me that much. And I think there's an element that might be like, oh, well, Anthony Campanile might get hired away to be a head coach. He's great. I really think that he is. I would be shocked if after just this one season he gets hired away. Like to only have done it once and not been like a dominant defense, it would be like kind of shocking that he already gets that kind of call up.
It'd be surprising. I mean, I feel like in this cycle where there's a lot of just defensive coaches and it seems like kind of a strange year for coaching candidates, I don't necessarily know if I'd be shocked, but I do think it would be surprising if he got a job after 1 year. In terms of resources for this team, it's an interesting team because it's not a typical like year one explosion, because they've spent a lot of money. They have negative $7 million in cap space as things currently stand. Like they've handed out a lot of substantial deals that will still be on the books in some capacity next year. Walker Little, Eric Armstead, Foye Oluokun, Josh Hines-Allen, Patrick McCary, Jordan Lewis. They're eating $40 million in dead money for the Tyson Campbell, Gabe Davis, and Darnell Savage contracts. And so it's an expensive team for this to be like this to be their breakout season, essentially. Like this idea that, oh, we can really build on this, and this is kind of the first stage of it. The resources don't really align with that, especially when you consider they don't have a first-round pick because of the Travis Hunter trade, but they still have 4 top 100 picks because of the Isaac Tesla trade. So they have 2 additional third-round picks because of that deal. So they have 4 picks in the top 100. And then over the last few years, there is, like, compared to the Panthers especially, like the Panthers have these 2 or 3 draft classes that are just non-existent. The Jags made a lot of like 2nd through 4th round picks over the last few years. And even beyond that, like Parker Washington was a 6th round pick. Antonio Johnson was a mid-round or day 3 pick.
Jaron Jones last year was a 3rd round pick.
Jaron Jones was a 3rd round pick. There are like 6 to 8 guys over the last few drafts that are contributing players to this team. So even if they've spent a decent amount of money in free agency and it's an expensive roster, compared to Carolina, like I said, there isn't an underlying level of talent. There is kind of an underlying level of talent to this Jaguars team. Cheap, like cost-controlled talent.
Right. So, and again, like them, I really hope a lot of those picks go towards the offensive line because I do think part of the problem is, one, finding offensive linemen, particularly along the interior that you would want to sign in this cycle might be difficult, but they also spent a lot. I mean, not a lot. They were mid-round or like mid-tier contracts, but they spent on center and right guard last offseason. And so to like dip back into the free agency pool would be hard. I think it would make more sense if like maybe that first 3rd round pick is like an offensive lineman that you just hope wins a camp battle and does something for you.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit, and I don't think they'll be as aggressive in some of the solutions the same way that this team was. It's what Washington did last year, where they had Allegretti and Andrew Wiley, and those guys were like year 1 starters that were kind of like stopgap players. That did not prevent them from using draft capital to try to get to upgrade at those spots. And so they go out, they draft Josh Cotterly in the 1st round. Wiley gets bumped down a spot. Like if they did that with the left guard and the center this year, I don't think that would necessarily be surprising. McCary's making too much to justify that. He's making like $15 million, but the other interior spots, like I don't think that's crazy at all. Look, I'm actually curious. Yeah, Hainsey's making $8 million against the cap next year.
You can move on from that as a starter and not really have much of an issue with that.
If that's just a depth piece for you, I think you can justify that as just like he's your swing guy. Again, that's kind of a similar range to what the Washington guys were making. The one that's probably needs to be addressed in some way, Walker Little has a $15 million cap hit next year, and Cole Van Lanen beat him out as your starting left tackle. And so I would not be surprised if they tried to move on from Little in some capacity. They cannot cut him because they would actually lose cap space. He has $18 million in dead money. But if they traded him, they'd save about $7.5 million in space. And even if he got beat out by Van Lanen, he has an $11 million base salary for a team that needs like a capable tackle somewhere in the rotation. I think that's a call worth making potentially.
Somebody would give you a very late round draft pick to just like give you a shot at that and free up the money for you.
Anything else? Anything else on your mind about this Jags team?
The only other player that I don't think we really mentioned in terms of pending free agents is Travis Etienne.
Yes.
I think they'll be fine if they just let him walk. Like I think he had a decent season, but I actually really liked what they got from a couple of their other backs as role players, Bashal Tootin and LaQuint Allen. And then I also just think that that's a position that for them and for like what Etienne gave them, I think it would not be that difficult for them to replace him either with some other cheap free agent running back or spend 3rd, 4th round pick on a guy like that and try to replace him.
What is your confidence level that the 2026 Jags will be as good as the 2025 Jags were?
Not that high because they're going to play a first place schedule. And I do think, again, some of the takeaways are going to go away. And like, I do think that it's more likely that they end up a team that is like, barring some sort of crazy move that they make that gets some superstar in here, which I don't foresee given that they don't have a 1st round pick to really wield. I imagine they'll probably be like a 9-10 win team, which is fine, but not quite as exciting as it was this year.
I think that's probably where I land too. They lost like 10 total starts from the offensive line this year, which isn't nothing. They were banged up. It was like 2 games here, 2 games there. So they were relatively healthy there. They were 6-3 in 1-score games. They're plus 13 in the turnover margin. So there is a chance they take a slight step back, but I think there is justified reasons for optimism when it comes to what the most important pieces of the franchise now look like.
You hope that if the offense is what it was for the last 8 weeks, the whole year, that kind of washes away some of the other
And
areas that you might regress. Yeah, I 100% agree.
The Philadelphia Eagles. I feel like we don't have to spend a ton of time on this one because we did more of it on the recap show than we did with some of the other teams, because to me, it's just not that complicated. Like this is the simplest one to me when it comes to the offseason questions that need to be answered about the Eagles. I don't know if you agree.
No, I'm pretty clear about what they need to do. Even some of the pending free agents, it's just like I have a pretty good idea of who you should let walk and who you should try to keep in the building. Jaelan Phillips, given what you traded for him and how insanely good he was for you when you got him, I think you absolutely have to keep him. The other role players on the defense, like Reed Blankenship has been really nice for them. You can probably let him walk and replace him. N'Kobe Dean, I know he's really fun and like an awesome blitzer. You just drafted Jahad Campbell. You can probably just let N'Kobe Dean walk. Like Fred Johnson, like I know he's been decent for them as like a swing tackle, backup tackle. You're the Eagles. Like you run an offensive line factory. You can probably let him go. Like I think a lot of the choices that they have to make here are pretty simple. Really, the only complicated one is like there's clearly a rift between A.J. Brown, the quarterback, all of that stuff going on. You just can't really move A.J. Brown this year. They can actually do it fairly easily after this year, and it's not going to really kill them, but this offseason does make it pretty difficult.
It's a $44 million dead cap hit if he's traded before June 1st. And so you'd have to trade him after June 1st for it to be palatable financially. Whether that's what they want, they have the appetite for that, and they feel like it's something they need to do, I can't speak to that. A.J. Brown is a really good player, and I think I'd rather just try to fix the ecosystem offensively before I traded A.J. Brown. Right now, they have 4 top 100 picks because I don't know, I'm curious where that one came from. They have a 3rd-round pick from the Jets, which is just one of my favorite things about the Eagles every single offseason is looking at the picks they have and be like, I wonder where that one came from.
Who did they steal that one from?
Let's look at this. I want to find out the answer to it because I think it'd probably be it'd be fun to know. Oh, the Hassan Reddick trade.
Oh my God. That's very Eagles to get that back. And Reddick is on neither of those teams now, by the way.
So because of the Hassan Reddick trade, the Eagles have the 68th pick in the draft. So it's not even just that it's a 3rd-round pick. It is the 4th
68 is pretty good.
It is the 4th pick of the 3rd round that the Eagles now have in the Hassan Reddick trade, which is just wonderful. And they gave up the 87th pick in the Jaelan Phillips trade.
That's good business. That's real good business.
They typically do a lot of this.
And so that's the other thing that makes this not very complicated. It's like in terms of the money decisions that they have to make, you know where it's going to go in terms of like Jaelan Phillips and where it's not going to go.
I don't know if it's going to go to Jaelan Phillips necessarily.
I think
I would.
Should. Right.
I think
right.
he should be this year's version of what they did with Bond, where maybe he wasn't in your plans originally, but he's played well enough within the defense that you could justify bringing him back.
100%. So like at least in my mind, that's where it would go. And then there are some of these other teams where the Jaguars, the draft gets complicated because you don't have a 1st-round pick or whatever. The Eagles are going to have their 1st-round pick and, like you said, 3 other top 100 picks. They have all the resources to be good again, assuming they just get offensive coordinator back to a competent level, somebody who's done it before. This team, if they can fix the vibes a little bit and get A.J. Brown happy, this team will win. Like, they'll walk to 11 wins next year.
Offensive coordinator is going to be the biggest question. We know that. And my assumption is it'll be somebody who's called plays before. The exact same way they did it with Kellen Moore. The name that I keep coming back to just because he's available in this cycle, he's shown an ability to do this before with a talented roster and with a talented quarterback specifically. They hire a guy like Brian Daboll. You have Brian Daboll and Vic Fangio heading into next year. You have this roster back again. I just don't, again, I don't know how much more complicated it is than that.
And it's funny, you actually posed this to me before the show. I recoiled hearing the name Brian Daboll just because of how weird the last couple of years with the Giants have been. But we have seen him have success with this like style of quarterback before. One, he literally did it in college with Jalen Hurts when they were at Alabama. And then I think just in terms of like overall physical skill set, you can make a good case that what both Daniel Jones and Jackson Dart are is like not that dissimilar from Jalen Hurts, just in terms of some of the throws they like to make, physical ability, some of the rushing capabilities, all that stuff. Like if Brian Daboll can get them back to C+ play calling, which is really all that it takes, they'll probably be fine.
I totally agree. We said it last night on the show. I just think it's about clearing a certain bar of competency. And I think Brian Daboll clears that bar of competency. And so trying to go out and get somebody like that, I don't think Sirianni should lose his job. But this cycle of go to the Super Bowl or crash out, go to the Super Bowl or crash out every single year is pretty maddening if you were to root for this team. But I don't think it's frustrating enough for you to be considering that sort of change in this moment.
Yeah, again, you have to have 2 years in a row like that where
Yes.
where it really starts to.
And if they do have 2 years in a row, we will have that conversation. I think the Eagles will probably be ready to have that conversation if it doesn't come together next year. The personnel stuff, you mentioned this a little bit. Blankenship's a free agent, so I think that's something you potentially may need to address. You have Makuba coming back from injury this year, but I'm not sure there's another guy in the safety pipeline on that team. Like, are we just going to roll into next season with Sidney Brown as a starter? Probably not, right? So that's an area that probably needs to be addressed. And then they need to do something to upgrade that other outside corner spot, whether that's in the draft, whether that's in free agency. Like, that should be a priority this offseason. And then the other spot that I think is something they should consider when it comes to where they're spending their resources this year, it's probably time to start committing some like real draft resources to the offensive line again. For in 2 spots. Like, Lane's going to be 36 in May. And he's been healthier in recent years, but I think it's worth protecting yourself there. Like, trying to figure out the heir apparent to him at tackle and giving yourself like a solid, talented option as your swing tackle. Like, if they drafted a tackle in the first round next year, I don't think that would be shocking.
No,
right?
I don't think that would be crazy at all. Like, this is a team that has consistently been like, you plan a little bit ahead. Them and Dallas, I think, have always done a really good job of even planning ahead at offensive line when they have to. If they spent a first-round pick on it, again, because they're in the luxury of, it would be nice if their first-round pick played for them next year. The roster is so good that they kind of can burn a redshirt year on like a first-round tackle that you're trying to get ready behind Lane Johnson if they had to.
I don't think that's a misallocation of resources whatsoever.
Or honestly, if they really wanted to just play him at right guard this upcoming season, because I think if they replaced Tyler Steen this offseason, it wouldn't be that crazy.
And that was the next thing I was going to say. Probably time to try to find another right guard somewhere through the draft, like with a potential like a day 2 pick, like a second round pick, a third round pick, that spot, and getting better at that spot and trying to reestablish like a truly dominant offensive line all the way across the board so you can hopefully get back to the way you were running the ball a couple years ago. I think that should be near the top of your priority list. Last one here, the Los Angeles Chargers. I think we have to start with what is kind of newsy, right? Like, so after the game, Jim Harbaugh was asked about whether he thinks Greg Roman should be the offensive coordinator, whether that he should be back. And he essentially said in the moment, I don't have an answer to that right now. He wouldn't commit to it. And I feel like that was his answer to a lot of stuff afterwards. But if that's your response when somebody asks you if your offensive coordinator is going to be back, seems like it's something that's worth paying attention to.
The answer is probably that he's gone. And ultimately this, I've seen people making these jokes about this, like on Blue Sky or whatever. Ultimately, every Harbaugh regime comes to a point where Greg Roman, you run out of road with what it could be. And I do think like the Greg Roman offense has a lot of issues. That was also compounded by how bad and banged up the offensive line was. But we've known and we've seen with his offenses that he, I think, struggles to come up with answers when he's got like one hand tied behind his back. And I think that's ultimately where they landed in this playoff game, where they got thoroughly outcoached in that game by the New England Patriots.
We dug into all of it.
Who was on a backup defensive coordinator effectively. Like, Zach Kerr was not supposed to be their play caller coming into this year.
The injuries are the injuries for the Chargers offensive line, but the linemen that they came into the season with that were healthy did not play well.
That's who failed you. It was Milton Williams in the backfield all game against your starting guards.
The interior all season was a massive problem. And I feel like if you watch that group, their inability to pick up stunts, some of the protection stuff, that is there are talent issues with the Chargers offensive line. And when you're playing with second, third, fourth string tackles, you are going to notice that. But you don't want to absolve the coaching staff and just say, oh, the group was hurt. Like, it doesn't matter. It was not a well-orchestrated offense independent of the offensive line injuries. And so if they think that we've reached that point in the Harbaugh life cycle, that it's time to move on and go somewhere else, I get that. And like, does Herbert get the same Todd Monken type boost that Lamar got? And I feel like if he does, I'll be curious to see what that version of the offense looks like.
I really hope so, man. And we came none of this is like revisionist history on our part. We came into this offseason being like, this interior is not good enough. Like, Zion Johnson, I think, has been really up and down for them for a lot of his career. And then Bradley Bozeman, I thought was questionable for them to continue with him. And then they tried to like flip-flop those two in camp. They bring in Andre James for like extra help at the center spot. Like, they were trying to shuffle around that interior. Ultimately landed like where they were before and put in Becton at right guard, who the Becton one, it's like, okay, you get it. He's, finally looked like he found a little bit of life in Philly. You're running a scheme that theoretically could fit some of his strengths, but then he just kind of flames out and doesn't really do anything for you. Like, a lot of the bets that they made and a lot of what they were trying to do process-wise on the interior, just none of it came to fruition.
I feel like this is one of those moments where, all right, you tried to do it the cheap way, no more half measures. Like, you have $103 million in cap space this year. Is it worth just saying, we're going to go out and get 2 new starters on the interior? Joe Alt's going to be back next season, right? Joe Alt has said, said today that his ankle injury was as like layered and multifaceted as it could have been. He said, I think the exact quote was, everything that you could do to an ankle, I did. But I think it's like a 4 to 5 month recovery process. He should be ready for the season. Rashawn Slater is yet another offensive tackle that's going to be coming back from that torn patellar injury, and we'll see what his return timeline looks like. But that happened in training camp, and so optimistically, maybe he's ready for the beginning of this season. So you have both your tackles back. I'm fine rolling with Becton again as your right guard. Like, you've committed to him. He signed a 2-year deal.
That's what are you going to do?
Yeah. If he's going to be your right guard next year, that's fine. Those 2 other spots, you have $103 million in cap space. This is the team where just throw some money at Tyler Linderbaum. Throw some money at David Edwards. Use that money to kind of leave no doubt about the talent level of your offensive line. Because if you can do that, and if you can hire a staff or an offensive coordinator that can give you a better protection plan and not consistently get picked on all year, you have a talent personnel solution up front. You have a schematic solution up front. I'm fine with the current collection of pass catchers. Like, I'm fine with that group. I'm not sure you need to go out and do anything drastic there.
It would look better if the quarterback was not under siege every single snap. And I'm not sure it would, anyone would ever put it in the top 10 pass catching groups in the league or anything. But I think when Justin Herbert is your quarterback, it doesn't need to be that. It just needs to be like fine and have a couple of guys who can play a couple of different roles and just not have him killed in the pocket every snap.
If you want to draft another receiver in the second round, and because Keenan Allen's getting older, you're probably going to move on from him, and it's McConkey, Trey Harris, Quentin Johnston, and then you're adding a little bit of competition to that group with Gadsden.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine to me. Like, I think that is a reasonable offense personnel-wise, especially if you're going to swap out the offensive coordinator and start over systematically. So that's where I would use a decent chunk of the free agent money. The other spot that needs to be addressed just in terms of the roster, the defensive front. So many of these guys are hitting free agency. Khalil Mack is a free agent, Teair Tart is a free agent, Deshaun Hand is a free agent, and Odafe Owe is a free agent. So I would assume some of that money is potentially going to go to retaining a couple of those guys. Like, Teair Tart was awesome for them this year.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you'd have a hard time replacing a guy like Teair Tart with a cheaper option or some sort of draft pick. Owe was really good for them this year. He's a young player. So how they spend that money and who they choose to bring back, I'll be really curious what that looks like.
I will too, because honestly, I think all those guys played well. Like, Deshaun Hand was actually pretty good for them, I thought, as a run defender this year. Obviously, Teair Tart was incredible. Khalil Mack is not 2022 Khalil Mack, but he's still pretty damn good and was like a really, really good run defender, which, especially for the way you're trying to play defense, I actually think is incredibly valuable. So I do think the front needs to get fixed. And then I would still, they have the weirdest outside cornerback room in.
Oh, that's the other spot
in
I
the
would,
league.
I would address.
Like, I like Cam Hart for what he is. If you could get somebody better, that would probably be great.
Like Cam Hart as a depth piece, fine, but think you need to go out and really commit to that this year. Is exactly what I wrote in my notes in terms of what they might need to do at corner.
That's pretty nails. Like, if he has to play, and there are certain matchups where he's great, as a 17-week starter, there are some games and some times where you're like, we wish we had somebody else out here.
The offensive line and corner specifically are 2 positions where they were like, all right, let's see if we can tinker and figure it out. It didn't work. Okay, let's bring a little bit more of a hammer into this offseason and see if you can get some more expensive solutions there. I think that's totally fine.
I actually will say, to go back to the offense a little bit quickly, obviously offensive line is the big thing they need to solve. I would like a little bit more help at tight end. I actually think if they could get guys who are stronger role players at that position, like, this isn't a hit on Gadsden. I actually think he's a nice young player.
But he is what he is.
Right, exactly. Yeah. He is what he is.
He's a pass catcher.
Exactly. I would like a little bit more of a full tight end room, especially for the way that I think even when they change the offensive coordinator, I assume like multiple tight end sets are still going to be part of the way they run this thing. It's a Jim Harbaugh team.
Well, it's funny. We were talking about this during the game yesterday and how the Chargers have the stoutest group of skill position players in the league. Like, the Tucker Fisk and Scott Matlock snaps that we get on that side of the ball. Like, not sure we need that many more of those.
Yeah, no, I think we're kind of done with that.
2 other big questions for me, or just 2 other conversations as it relates to this team. What hurts even worse than bottoming out and potentially needing a new offensive coordinator is that it seems like there's a real chance you're losing the coordinator of the unit that got you here. So far, Jesse Minter has requests from at least 3 teams that I saw, the Titans, the Browns, and the Ravens, for their head coaching job. And I feel like he is a very strong candidate to get one of those jobs. He has done exceptional work over the last couple of years. And I thought that he was really, really, really good this season. And so if you lose him, then you're having to replace what has been like probably a top 5 defensive coordinator over the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Clinkscales, who's their Clinkscale is their defensive backs coach. He was, I think, Minter's co-defensive coordinator at Michigan. And so they do have somebody that they could probably promote into that job, but who knows? Yeah, I mean, Jesse Minter did such a good job over the last couple seasons that there's a very real chance that schematically you take a step back on defense, and that is the best thing about what your team has been over the last couple years.
And again, like we've talked about, when you're changing defensive coordinator specifically, there's usually a 1-year buffer period before you get to whatever your best self is going to be. And so even if they promote within, you're still trying to figure out the ins and outs of like, okay, when do I call stuff? How do I layer some of my pressures and stuff like that? And so you have that element of it if they promote within. And then I do think Jim Harbaugh is obviously well connected enough. It's consistently hired really good coordinators that he could find somebody else. Like if, the Titans, like if Denard Wilson is on the market, like somebody like that, like they could totally find another answer. But Jesse Minter, really outside of like a couple of the clear guys at the very top, like Mike Macdonald, was as good as it gets as a defensive play caller.
The last thing I feel like we should talk about before we move on with this team is just another playoff disappointment from the quarterback. I don't want to ignore that. And I went back and I watched that game again this morning. And when you go back and you watch a game after having watched it in real time, often you come away with different opinions or conclusions. It's like, oh, and actually going back and rewatching it, this is how I see it. I kind of feel the same way now that I did after watching it in real time. Like this idea that they were out-schemed top to bottom on that side of the ball. The offensive line still didn't play well. There were probably 5 to 7 plays to be made by the quarterback in that game that he did not make. And he deserves to be criticized for that. Because if you're going to be one of the guys, you need to be able to transcend a lack of help on that side of the ball. I was way more disappointed in the way he played in this game than in the game last year against the Texans in the playoffs.
At least that game, he was like trying.
That was a systemic collapse last year against the Texans. They got out-coached in this game. This was not a systemic collapse. He played way worse, in my opinion, in this game than he did against the Texans last year. And that's extremely disappointing. Like, if you're going to be one of the guys, you should be able to transcend what's happening around you more than he was able to yesterday.
I 100% agree. And I will say, like, I don't think that there are many guys who could have transcended how bad it was, but it's not like he needed to transcend it and score 30 points.
He needed 17 points.
Yes, exactly. Like that was the type of game that he was playing, and he ultimately struggled to do that. Like it's such a tricky conversation too, because it's like, I think the biggest issues that Herbert had in this game were, one, he was not seeing it well whenever he came off his first read in particular, and he was not accurate. Herbert's entire career will tell you those are not issues. But ultimately, you get to this game, you're pressured. I think I was looking this up. He was pressured like almost 57% of the time, which is the highest pressure rate in a game over the last 2 years. But still, he's had moments this year where he could overcome that against better defenses like the Philadelphia Eagles. And in this game, he kind of had nothing.
Yeah. And that's it. You're right in that it is a tricky conversation, because I can understand if you're somebody who is a Justin Herbert skeptic and you look at this game and be like, well, why does he keep playing his worst football in the playoffs? And I'm somebody that, and I've said this over and over and over again, like, I don't think how a quarterback season ends should discount everything that came before it.
They shouldn't have been in the playoffs if not for how well he played for a lot of the season.
Yes. And so I don't think it should discount everything else that happened this season. But at the same time, like, if you are going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the league, you cannot consistently be having your worst performances in the playoffs. And that's exactly what's been happening. I wouldn't go as far as to say like the playoff bone in his body doesn't function. Like, I just don't know if that's the thing. But if this continues to happen, then I don't know what other reasonable conclusion you can reach other than he just doesn't have it in these moments, which is not a place I typically go. But if you keep stacking these up, then I don't know where else you're going to be able to land.
Right. At a certain point, if it ends up happening like 6 or 7 times, then it's like, okay, this does start to become a problem. I'm still willing to, at least, especially the last two, explain them away to some degree, given how bad the offensive line was. But again, I would have liked to have seen him play better in that game.
It was,
because there were some chances.
It was a disappointing performance.
Yeah.
And again, I come back to the same place I was at last night. I think that he's almost overcompensated for my frustrations with Justin Herbert in the early parts of his career. And that's what's funny is that I think that the criticisms of what he was last night are very, very different than the criticisms of what he was early in his career.
Mm-hmm.
Early in his career, my frustrations with Justin Herbert was he was like a risk-averse robot.
He was like Derek Carr-ish.
That. And so watching what he was last night, we need something in the middle of those two things. Like we need something where he is taking chances and he's trying to be the best player on the field, but he's not doing that at the expense of making the right decisions. And that's what was happening last night, where he's just going into hero mode so quickly that when there are opportunities to be made within structure, he's not making those opportunities. But that's so far removed from what his shortcomings were even like 2 years ago that I don't think this is some like continuation of the problems that Justin Herbert has had in the past. It's been like a moving target as to what is negatively affecting him.
And that's kind of the thing too, is like you just hope that him going so far outside of himself over the last 2 years, especially like as a scrambler and as a runner, you hope that that finds its middle ground somewhere. You hope that it finds its level, especially, and I do think that there will be a higher chance that it does find his level if he's not getting killed every play.
Yes.
Like if the pass protection gets to 20th best in the league and he doesn't feel as frantic as he did in some of these moments, then maybe he does start to like settle to a point where, okay, I can take some of these shots where I need them. Some of these other times I just don't have to do that. But it is frustrating that he's oscillated between these games and these letdowns where early in his career was not doing enough despite the talent, to these moments where it's like, buddy, we need to like settle down a little bit.
And you hope that a system, a coordinator that instill and pass protection that instills a certain level of trust can get you to a place where you find that middle ground. And I'm not trying to make excuses. Like this is tough. This is a tough place to land if you're somebody that believes in him.
As someone who also believes in him, this is probably the most frustrating one of his losses that I've watched. Because even like, you know, we can say whatever we want about how he played in the second half of the loss against the Chargers. That is a defensive letdown. Like
the Jaguars.
Against the Jaguars.
I 100%
like, that
agree.
is a defensive letdown in that game.
Agree.
And then the Texans game is just like, you are flatly outgunned. You were not...
Systemic failure.
Yes. Like, you were simply outgunned in that game. The Patriots game, you can argue because the offensive line is still so bad that it's a very difficult position to be in. But that's not like a world-beating Patriots team. Like, they came out with a good game plan, but that is not like a world-beating talent front that you just lost to.
In my opinion, of the 3 playoff losses, this is easily the one which he was most culpable for.
Yes.
And I think people would look at how many interceptions did he throw against the Texans last
4.
year? Yeah, and they'd be like, that's a crazy thing to say. To me, it's not even close. Like, I'm way more frustrated and disappointed in the way he played last night than I am with the way he played in that Texans game last year.
He wasn't putting throws anywhere near his receiver, let alone DBs. Like, the ball just wasn't even in the area to be picked off.
The offense could not function against the Texans last year. They could function last night. They just didn't.
Yep.
And he deserves a chunk of the blame for that. All right. That is all we've got for today. I think right now in your podcast feed, our recap from last night's game between the Texans and the Steelers should be available for you. So if you have not listened to that already, encourage you to go check that out. We'll be having a bunch more shows coming your way this week on the feed. Building the Beast will be in its normal spot on Wednesday. I will be back on Thursday recapping the latest coaching news. We had to do that again. I mean, there's no way that we could just bypass all of the coaching cycle stuff because so much stuff has happened since we did our initial check-in on Black Monday. Mike McDaniel was fired. John Harbaugh was fired. So Kevin Stefanski is interviewed for a bunch of these jobs. John Harbaugh seems like he might be trending toward being the Giants coach. There's just a bunch of stuff that we're going to have to hit. And so that's going to be your way on Thursday. And then once again this week, we're going to be breaking our divisional preview into 2 separate shows, one for Saturday, one for Sunday. So a ton more coming your guys' way over the next 5 days or so. For now, that's all we got. Appreciate you guys listening. Talk to you very soon. Thanks for watching. Follow The Athletic Football Show wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube.